5 mountain peaks, 2 land areas, 2 residential areas and 2 rivers. What does that mean? That means starting today, names of these locations will be available on Chinese maps in Pinyin, which is the common romanization of Mandarin characters. Now, this is only going to escalate matters between the two nations diplomatically. India and China remain embroiled in a tense border impasse over several friction sites, especially in eastern Ladakh. India and China ties cannot be seen as a one-way street. That was the unequivocal message that was sent by S. Jaishankar in August of last year. But China just doesn't seem to get that message. The message will be sent time and again. It will be sent until China hears it loud and clear, and today was no different. China can needle us all they want, but India will not tolerate it. That was the message the Ministry of External Affairs sent out today through a statement. They said that Beijing has made similar attempts twice in the past and we rejected outrightly. Arunachal is and will be an inalienable part of India, and China cannot claim any of it, is also what the ministry came out and said. China can do anything it wants, but they will not be able to alter reality and the truth. These are invented names, said the Ministry of External Affairs. So the message is quite clear. Now, this is not an isolated incident. Neither is it the first time that China has tried to make these cartographic changes. In the last 6 years, this is the third such attempt by China to reiterate its claim on the entire Indian state of Arunachal Pradesh. The first batch of 6 names was released in November of 2017, just a few days after the visit of Tibetan spiritual leader Dalai Lama to Arunachal Pradesh. China was miffed with India for allowing that visit. The second list was then released in 2021 in December, just 2 days before China's new land border law came into effect. There were 15 places that were marked on Chinese maps in a region that was titled South Tibet. In the third attempt, which came in this year, 11 places have now been renamed. Interestingly, the list also includes a town close to the Arunachal Pradesh capital of Itanagar. Now, India has condemned every single provocation from China in the sharpest of words. And it's not just words, there's action too from New Delhi. Whether it's enough or not to deter China, that still remains a subject of debate. But here are the steps taken by the government so far. India is aggressively working on building infrastructure along its northern borders. It has stepped up efforts to counter China's build-up along the line of actual control. The Quad grouping is also aimed to counter China's reach in the Indo-Pacific region. Remember, China was miffed at the fact that the region was called Indo-Pacific to begin with. India has also ramped up lending in Latin America, Africa and other parts of Asia, including in neighboring countries, to counter China. We've banned more than 250 Chinese apps. They've been termed as a threat to privacy and security of Indians. That digital strike has also happened. But the opposition in this country is not impressed. From demanding answers inside the parliament since the Galwan clash of 2020 to questioning Modi government's foreign policy, the opposition has kept the heat on the issue. Even today, the Congress released a statement blaming the Prime Minister's silence for this aggression that we see from China. They raked up the situation in the Depsang plains of Kashmir to what's happened now in Arunachal. AIMIM chief Assuddin Owaisi also used this opportunity to slam the central government. Listen in to those reactions.
यहाँ पर मोदी सरकार एनसीईआरटी से मुगलों की तारीख को मिटा रही है, पास को, और चाइना जो है जिसका मोदी जी G20 इंडोनेशिया में चेयर से, कुर्सी से उठकर पलटकर जाकर हाथ मिलाए थे, एनसीईआरटी में मुगलों की तारीख को मिटाया जा रहा है और चीन हमारी प्रेजेंट को मिटा रहा है, प्रेजेंट को मिटा रहा है हमारे नामों को। ये इसमें खुश है और चीन प्रेजेंट नामों को मिटा रहा है। तीसरी मर्तबा हो चुका है। क्यों हो रहा है? क्योंकि चीन जानता है कि देश के प्रधानमंत्री मोदी जी चीन का नाम नहीं लेंगे। दूसरा, ये सरकार फैक्ट्स नहीं बोलती। तीसरा, इनका रिस्पांस वीक है।
मोदी सरकार की एक और कलंक गाथा भारत के सम्मान के लिए लज्जाजनक दिवस है मोदी सरकार पर। एक तरह से उसने भौगोलिक रूप से अपनी धृष्टता चीन ने जाहिर कर दी है। अरुणाचल पर नाम बदलकर कब्जे का उद्घोष किया है। अरे भारत की चिंता करिए प्रधानमंत्री जी, इसकी एकता अखंडता की रक्षा जो हमारे जवान प्राणों की आहूत देके करते हैं, और आप चीन के सामने मुंह खोलने में डरते हैं।
Now, many experts believe that India has been moving away from the policy of coddling China. They are of the opinion that India's support to the One China policy was not an active choice. It was rather a compromise that was executed to maintain a peaceful power balance. But what is this One China policy? Let's break it down for you. This One China policy is a diplomatic acknowledgement, one that acknowledges China's position that there is only one Chinese government and not different Chinese states. It can be traced back to 1949 at the end of the Chinese Civil War. Under this particular policy, nations that have formal diplomatic ties with China cannot have ties with Taiwan, which is seen as a breakaway province. That is China's claim, and that is something that needs to be backed by all nations who have ties with China. That's what the policy dictates. Now, India recognized the People's Republic of China in 1950. India has so far stuck by that policy. But in 2010, we refused to reaffirm it. It was that mention was dropped as far as a joint statement during the Manmohan Singh era was concerned. Back 2 years ago, the Ministry of External Affairs as well once again refused to reiterate that particular claim right after we saw ties souring between the two nations. So does the current policy need a revisit? Is that the only deterrent China will understand? That's our focus on The Right Stand tonight. Is it time for a revisit? Is it time for not just words but action to ensure that China falls in line? Joining me on this broadcast, spokesperson of the BJP, Tom Vadakan, Mohan Kumar Mangalam, spokesperson of the Congress Party, is with us. Professor Brahmachalani, strategic affairs expert, and Aina Tangin, political affairs commentator, also joining us on this broadcast. And before we get into the politics of it, I want to get in Professor Brahmachalani. Do you think that India can do more? Do you think that all that we've done so far as deterring China is concerned is enough, or is there room for more to be done? And if so, then what are those measures that can be taken?
Well, to Prime Minister Modi's credit, India has refused to buckle to the increasing Chinese military pressure. India has more than matched China's Himalayan military deployments. And by locking horns with China in tense military standoffs for the last 34 months, despite the risk of a full-scale war, India has openly challenged Chinese capability and power in a way no other power, including the US, has done in this century. So militarily, India is doing what it should and what is needed. But I think this is where the problem is, that India is not playing its economic and diplomatic cards. To be able to exert pressure on China, to pressure China to behave in a better manner, it's very important for India not just to rely on its military power. It has to also use its economic and diplomatic leverage. For example, letting China increase its trade surplus with India by about 50% last year is out of sync with a situation along the frontier which is almost warlike. The fact that there are tens of thousands of Indian and Chinese troops locked in confrontation. In many places they are in eyeball confrontation. In that situation, to allow China to reap rewards of aggression by boosting its bilateral trade surplus year after year to such an extent that has crossed India's total defense spending, that it has actually, China's trade surplus is now more than $100 billion. And diplomatically too, we have, despite all the rhetoric from the Indian side, we have a normal relationship with China. We have hosted the Chinese foreign minister, not just the present one, his predecessor also came despite the standoffs. And this year we'll be having, if Xi Jinping accepts India's invitations, he'll be attending not one summit in India, but two summits. In effect, despite the rhetoric, India is doing exactly what China wants, separating the border confrontation from the rest of the relationship. Now, there needs to be a nuanced change to India's China policy, because it's clear that India's China policy is not deterring China.
Sure.
It's not able to stop China from continuing to provoke India. And every week or every 2 weeks brings a fresh Chinese provocation. So we need to rethink our China policy. This does not mean that we need to be more muscular. We need to be wiser. We need to be more forward-looking. We need to see how we can nuance our China policy so as to build greater leverage
Sure.
against Beijing.
Sure. So we need to build that leverage. There are some loopholes that need to be plugged perhaps, but I want to get in Aina Tangen as well. And we've seen the kind of provocations that come to the fore ever so often from the Chinese side. The ties between the two countries are not normal, as the central government has been saying, as S. Jaishankar, the External Affairs Minister, has also been saying. He says it's a two-way street. There has to be reciprocation from the Chinese side and not provocation. Do you think this is only going to put further strain on these ties?
Well, the strain is there, and I think the latest renaming of different characteristics of what China refers as South Tibet and you refer to as Arunachal Pradesh is really an indication that China is partially giving up. I mean, they see India gathering with AUKUS and with, not AUKUS, Quad.
Yes.
And against China building permanent roads. China is also building things on their side, or what they perceive as their side. So you're seeing a hardening of the lines. There doesn't seem to be any kind of progress being made, although there have been 17 meetings. It's been incremental in terms of the meetings of the different military to militaries to solve this the issue of the extended border standoff. But at this time, I think it would be good. My colleague, says that there needs to be more nuance, more pressure, etc. But I have a couple questions. All right, if you weren't buying these things from China, where would you buy them from, and would they cost more? And then the second part is, what exactly does India want? Putting pressure on China assumes that China wants something. If that could be enunciated, I think it would be a fresh start. The idea that China is going to hand over disputed areas is probably not very realistic. Idea of trying to start another Ukrainian type of conflict situation probably wouldn't work out either, as they're both nuclear powers. So what is it that India wants, and what strategies are they using to get it? That's a question that I often hear here in Beijing, because they're not quite certain.
Sure. So, Tom Borakan, like both our panelists have been pointing out, especially Brahmachalani, who was talking about how, yes, there is a lot that has been done, but there is scope and room for more improvement. There is a long way to go for China actually to fall in line. So, when the opposition says that the government's silence or the Prime Minister's silence on this issue is perhaps strengthening China to provoke us ever so often, do you think that criticism is valid then?
Well, Poonam, it is not for the Prime Minister to react on this issue. There is the Foreign Minister, and there's Ministry of External Affairs, and there's a spokesman of the Ministry of External Affairs who has rightly reacted to the situation.
Sure.
Be what it may, the whole issue is these are the kind of mind games that China has been indulging over a period of time. They have done changing of names even with Russia. This is not specific on India. They've done that with Russia. They've done that with Taiwan. So this is the kind of game that they play, and mind game. There has been this meeting that was G20 meeting, which the Chinese side skipped because it was held in Arunachal Pradesh on 26 March, and this kind of games go on. But I think the opposition is getting carried away with the fact that we are competent. The borders are well covered. The confrontation is there. There are 2 points at which there's eyeball to eyeball confrontation level, which has been admitted by MEA. Be what the situation may be, but India should not be provoked by all these things. By changing names, you don't come into the territory. This is Chinese maps. They can take it home and set fire to it for all we care. But the point here is we are on a very careful terrain. We want to have diplomatic relation with all our neighbors, and if there is provocation from certain parties in India, it is part of an MOU they have signed. That's the job they're doing.
Sure.
Because every time they get fodder from China, they're at it. So I don't think we should be extremely alarmed on that. Our positions are very clear. Militarily, we are there. Presence is there. We have not given an inch of territory. The territory that has been lost out was during the Congress era. They don't want to admit that. Now, as to the trade relation, there have been apps that have been, banned by India. And there are various other steps India is proactive about China at every international level.
Sure.
So there is a fear in China that India is probably going far
Sure.
ahead and is playing chess according to the games that
Sure,
Chinese
so
would
it's
like
mind
us to
games
play.
and we really must not read much into it. Mohan Kumar Mangalam is also what the BJP is pointing out. Also, I want to ask who really is missing the woods for the trees? Yes, there is a lot that can be done, like several of these panelists have been pointing out, but there's also a lot that has been done. Can we deny the fact that infrastructure has been fortified along the line of actual control? Can we deny the fact that several of these apps have been banned? There has been a digital strike, so to say, against the Chinese. We have strengthened our relationship with other allies of ours to send a message to China. That has been done in the tenure of this particular government. Can you deny those facts either?
Let me start by expanding a little bit on what Mr. Chelani said, because in 2021, our trade deficit with China was close to $70 billion. Our exports to China had actually grown that year. And, after that, we came up with import tariffs, sort of returning to the era of protectionism, if you will. We had the PLI scheme that was launched with much fanfare. But in 2022, which is last year, our trade deficit with China actually went up to $100 billion, over $100 billion. So you can ban as many apps as you want. But I think as time is going by, we're becoming increasingly dependent. Our economy is becoming increasingly dependent on theirs. And I must tell you that our exports to China actually went down last year. So this dependence is only one way, and it seems to be growing. So I think that is something that, as someone from the opposition, I'd be very, very concerned about, because if it is one way that we can actually manage China is by a healthy economic interdependence, not the one-way dependence that is growing in this particular line. And so you ban TikTok and PUBG, if you will, but nobody's really paying 4G. You put tariffs on activated pharmaceutical ingredients, but I had to climb down really quickly because nobody could make them here. So we need a much more comprehensive economic strategy to be able to ensure that we keep China in check. The other thing I want to say is that one thing that we're not debating, which I think is very, very important to consider, is the Bhutanese Prime Minister's statement that was made 5 days ago. I'm surprised that the Indian Foreign Ministry has the time to respond to these frivolous name changes. This is the third time that it's happening. I think third time's the charm, so they finally ended up responding. Whereas what we should be really responding to, and in an urgent fashion, is the Bhutanese Prime Minister's statement that China actually has a say as to how the border dispute at the Tri-Junction turns out. We all know how strategically important the Doklam Plateau is to us.
Sure, the Ministry of External Affairs, in fact, did respond to it today, Mohan Kumar Mangalam. There was a press briefing by the Foreign Secretary. He did respond to that particular question. He said there were discussions and that is being discussed as far as the security interests go. But I get where you're going with this. That is something that
this is such a dramatic U-turn for the Bhutanese Prime Minister to say this, discussion, and he said this in public, he gave this as a statement to a newspaper.
Sure.
How come we are not choosing to respond to that? We have the Bhutanese king who came. I think he came yesterday or today, and he had a meeting with the Prime Minister and Mr. Ajit Doval. Why is it suddenly that he's come and he's concerned about China's increasing interest in Bhutan?
Sure.
You have China circling us on the Bhutanese side. You have China in Sri Lanka controlling a port. Please let us not pretend that we have all our problems sorted out.
Sure.
And I'm not even going to respond to this nonsensical rhetoric about some party signing an agreement with the CCP. I think the RSS went and signed an agreement with the CCP also. This sort of nonsensical rhetoric is not what we should be engaging in when it comes to an issue of national importance. Very much standing with the government when it comes to facing an opponent like China. But we must understand and discuss how are the different ways that we could actually keep them at bay.
Sure. And Tom Vadakkan, there are several ways that can be done. Like we've been speaking on in the last 15 to 17 minutes, as far as the trade surplus is concerned, or that disbalance, so to say, is concerned between exports and imports. Is that something that we could look into? Can we perhaps impose tariffs on at least non-essential items that come in from China? Is that the first step that could be taken? Is that something that is on the minds of those in the power corridors?
Poonam, that's a work in progress. I do not want to talk about it on television right now. From what I understand from my sources, this is a work in progress that is happening. But I would like to tell the Congress representative, there were these lobbying by some of the general secretaries for Chinese companies, and it's been going on. The connectors love and hate policy. I'm not talking about a particular MOU that was signed, but if they're so liberal, why don't they come out with this MOU? I mean, what is so secretive about it? It's not a national secret. Are you scared of something?
Why don't you?
Or is it because
come out
there's
with
something
the MOUs
there's a
that you have
giveaway
signed,
which will create problems for the Congress
party?
party?
This is nonsensical. See, this is nonsense.
It's not nonsense.
I mean,
it's
honestly,
reality.
when
The whole
parties
world
go
is
to
in
different parties, hold on a second, let me finish.
By
Why
the
are you out
General
here?
Secretary,
Let me
the
finish.
then President. What is nonsensical about it? And whenever China
What is nonsensical is that when parties
is
go...
understandable. We are working, it's a work in progress. We will do what we have to do. And that is the reality.
You don't
We
have...
can't talk
You
about
much like...
economics at this
You,
juncture. We are
you
looking
much
at it.
like
It's work in
the...
progress.
You much like
But
the
when
Chinese
your
Prime Minister...
General Secretary
Hold on a second. Hold on a second.
openly lobby
You are no different.
Chinese
Let me...
companies,
If you're going to
what do
make
you
this...
have to say about it? Can you
Let me instead
I
respond
can
to
name
you.
the names if
saying,
you care to hear me out.
You know, either let him finish or let me talk. One of the two.
I know,
Because
I'm
let
talking.
me say
I'm not,
that
I'm not
you have reduced India.
No,
You have
I am
reduced
talking
India
and
to
I'm
the
not
position
left
of the Bhutanese Prime Minister, where
You
everyone
are
knows that
diverting
China
issues.
has been building
You are
villages
diverting
in many
issues.
different points
It
of
is a question
Bhutan,
that has been
and
answered
he
by
has
NEA.
said that nobody is. No,
And you're bringing up an issue
you're
that
not even hearing the question I'm saying.
by the
I'm not
NEA
actually giving
right
you.
now.
I'm not actually asking a question here. I'm making a statement, and I'm saying
You're
that when the
making a
Prime
statement,
Minister
I'm
said
asking a
that
question.
nobody has entered our
It is
land.
settled. You're raking up an issue which has been
Encourage China much
settled.
as the Bhutanese Prime Minister
The matter
today
has
has
been
encouraged
settled.
them.
Will you listen
Every
to
matter
me?
seems
The
to be
matter has
settled.
been
Why are we
settled.
even arguing
Discussions are
about
at a very high
It
level.
seems to me that
And where are
everything
the
we
steps
should
that
take
we
at
have
face
taken?
value.
I can't talk on the television.
What steps
on a
have you
television
taken?
program of the steps taken
Are
by
you-
the GOI.
Are you
Because
privy
I'm
to
not-
what the Defense Ministry
I'm not at
and
the
the
right
External
to
Affairs
speak
Ministry
as a
is doing as a
political party.
spokesperson?
Sure,
on
these are
an
matters
issue.
of national security and not everything can be
Exactly.
divulged and not everything
So
can
I'm
be
sure
put
that
out.
he cannot.
But
I'm not even sure why he should be aware.
sure, but
It's not something that he should be aware of either. He seems
Yes.
to be saying that he's aware of something that he's not able to divulge. Why exactly is the ruling party spokesperson being aware of national
That is in my
security
personal
measures
capacity. I am
strategies
aware
that
of
we're
many
taking to
things
counter
which I
China?
will not disclose publicly.
You should not be aware.
I'm not
I
on
think that's
television
actually
to
something
disclose
wrong
these
if you
things
are
to you.
aware at all
In my
of these
personal
things.
capacity, I could know a lot of things. And I don't need your permission or the
Yes.
Congress
Sure.
party.
Let's just take for
permission.
sure,
granted the man
let's
knows
leave it at
everything
that,
he does.
gentlemen. The politics continues, but I want to get in Professor Brahmachalani as well. And the bigger picture here, the bigger point that many experts want to talk about, and that is something that perhaps the decision makers should also be looking at, is this one China policy. We've tried to move away from it from 2010 onwards, perhaps drop that mention, then not really give what China wanted as far as reiteration on that particular policy is concerned 2 years ago. But is it time to do more as far as that policy is concerned? Perhaps try and speak more openly about Taiwan, about Tibet. That perhaps would be step number one as far as that policy goes and sending a message to China goes. Is that something that's doable, Professor Chilani?
It is. Nobody's advocating a wholesale change in India's China policy, but adding nuance to our China policy, seeking to build leverage against Beijing, is something that needs to be done. The fact that Xi Jinping's regime is seeking to open new fronts against India, from Taiwan to the Coco Islands, casts an unflattering light on the Indian government's China policy. China is continuing to build up force levels along the Himalayas, even as military standoffs with India enter the 35th month. The fact that these provocations are happening, and this is just not a mind game, the fact that, for example, if China gains a foothold on the Coco Islands, it will not only open a maritime front against India, but also complete its strategic encirclement of India. So we're looking at developments that have far-reaching effects on India's security. We need to, for example, understand that China's territorial claims to Indian territories are all based on the fact that China claims that Tibet had those links with Indian territories. So Tibet is the basis for China laying claims to Indian territories. And yet, India still recognizes Tibet to be an integral part of the People's Republic of China. Can there be a stance that is more self-injurious to India's interests than this?
Sure.
China is laying claims to Indian territories on the basis of Tibet, and India says that Tibet is a part of China.
Sure.
Now, shouldn't we at least nuance that stance? Shouldn't we begin to
Yes, and
describe
I
the
believe
frontier?
there are many experts who would echo that sentiment. And I'm running short of time, but I want to give 30 seconds to Aina Tangen as well. And Aina Tangen, is it just domestic compulsions for the Xi Jinping administration to indulge in these kind of provocations that they do? Are they just playing to that kind of audience and there's really not much more to it?
No, it doesn't really get any coverage at the domestic level here. I think it is really just China signaling that it's going to pursue its own policy, regardless of the U.S. and increasingly of India. India has to make a decision whether it wants to be part of this growing multipolar world where you have, the BRICS basically and the developing countries who are pursuing their own interests, or
Yes.
whether it wants to try to straddle between the U.S. and China.
Sure. So whether they're playing to an audience or not, it definitely is a subject of debate here and a subject of politics as well.
Well, they're not playing
I have
to
to
the audience here.
Yes, I have to
It's
unfortunately
just
leave
not
it at
there.
that. I am running out of time, but I thank you all gentlemen for joining us here on this broadcast with your perspective. Pakistan is considering signing the CPEC Security Exchange Pact with China, which has been pending for the last 4 years. It would lead to enhanced cooperation between the two countries on military and security matters. It is a proposal that perhaps would lift Pakistan out of the economic doldrums that is in. The pact was raised in fact by China while the erstwhile Imran government was in power. It couldn't be finalized, one, due to COVID-19 restrictions, and second, due to apparent distrust or deficit of trust by China in the then Pakistani regime. Pakistan is now all set to ink this particular pact with China. We're given to understand that this is going to be a secret pact between Beijing and Islamabad. Under this new agreement, both countries will be enhancing military and security cooperation. Pakistani defense and military leadership is likely to visit Beijing this month, is what we're learning. They will be finalizing the draft of this particular agreement. Now, under this agreement, both the countries will be strengthening not just their military cooperation, there will be training and security exchange programs as well. Now, sources are telling your channel that China will be deploying military contractors in Pakistan under this particular agreement. In the first phase, China will be sending around 2,000 military contractors for this particular project. Its staff will be stationed in the Gwadar port. China has been involved in major mining and infrastructure projects in Pakistan already, including the deepwater Gwadar port, all part of the $65 billion China-Pakistan economic corridor. Now, what we're learning is that China is very keen for the Gwadar port to be operational at its full scale as soon as possible. This after striking the successful mediation between Saudi Arabia and Iran. China also wants Saudi to be part of the Belt and Road Initiative through the CPEC. They see that as benefiting Pakistan as well. China has now opened the Khunjab Pass for trade and CPEC consignments after 3 years. And sources tell CNN News 18 that China wants to accelerate its remaining projects and to bail out Pakistan from its economic crisis, because that's not only going to be benefiting Pakistan, but China also does see a repercussion that they will face as far as the CPEC project goes. We're shifting focus now to some political news that's coming in, and this is about former Congress leader Ghulam Nabi Azad, who's hit out directly at Rahul Gandhi. We have excerpts of his autobiography that we've accessed here, in which he's revealed how Rahul and Sonia Gandhi mishandled the Himanta Biswa Sarma departure from the Grand Old Party. Ghulam Nabi Azad talks about a certain incident that took place in 2015 where he says that Rahul Gandhi had said, let Himanta go. When Ghulam Nabi Azad, in fact, had informed him that Himanta Biswa Sarma could quit the party and not only walk away himself but take a huge chunk of his MLAs as well. Pallavi Ghosh, my colleague, joining us for more details on this. Pallavi, some explosive claims that have been made by Ghulam Nabi Azad, but what kind of response are we expecting from the Congress party? They have dismissed several of the claims that he has made in the past.
I'm sure the Congress party is going to accuse Ghulam Nabi Azad of being a B team of the BJP because this book is timed very, very close to Karnataka elections. And also the time that the Congress party is clearly trying to, garner its entire support about Rahul Gandhi and also playing the victim card about how Rahul Gandhi is now facing a lot of political witch hunt. But very quickly in that book, which really talks about the downfall of the Congress party and why he spoke about G23, he specifically actually makes a reference to Rahul Gandhi's mishandling of the situation. And here he talks about Hemanta Biswa Sarma, where he says that Sonia Gandhi actually had agreed that Hemanta Biswa Sarma, because he had the largest number of MLAs with him, should actually become the chief minister. But just before a day he was to fly to Guwahati, he was called back. And then you had a decision which was completely overturned by Rahul Gandhi, where he said that let him go. What is alarming in all of this are two important facts. That one, it was Sonia Gandhi's decision to change the chief minister, which means Rahul Gandhi actually overturned the decision of Sonia Gandhi. And second is, despite the fact that Sonia was aware of the clout of Hemanta Biswa Sarma, the MLAs were with him, she actually did not disagree with Rahul Gandhi's decision and she let it go. I think that's also the beginning of the growing power of Rahul Gandhi within the party affairs, despite the fact that he did not hold any formal position within the Congress. And all of this is going to be taken up by the BJP in the days to come. And also the book comes out tomorrow and which has lots of explosive details.
Right, the book comes out tomorrow. We'll wait and watch as to what the response is both from the Grand Old Party and the BJP. But for the moment, we are slipping into a quick break here on this edition.
BJP in the state that we can see, because Shimoga happens to be a very important constituency for the BJP. In fact, it has a very good strong hold in that particular district, and you see the present MLA from that particular constituency is KS Ishwara, who happens to be the former minister as well. But right now this whole clash has erupted because Ainur Manjunath, who is also an aspirant for the ticket, in fact is very much miffed against the party, where he has in fact alleged that the KS Ishwarappa has not refrained from making derogatory statements against him, and he is very much iked about it, and that's the whole reason that he want to contest against KS Ishwarappa and give him a strong competition there, and also on the other hand you see the KS Ishwarappa is eyeing a ticket once again, either for himself or for his son Kantesh. But yes, it's unlikely that the party will be able to give ticket to KS Ishwarappa because he's almost 74 years, and all you see what's the policy of the BJP also talks about in that manner, and that's the whole reason the former minister is trying a ticket for his son. But on the other hand, what we can also what one has to note here is also that if Ainur Manjunath also happens to resign from the BJP, then he will be the third MLC who would be resigning from the party. You remember just last month that two BJP MLCs in fact put their papers and have joined Congress because of the ticket that they really want to contest from one or the other constituency, where you see Putana happens to be getting a ticket from the Rajaji Nagar constituency from Congress. On the other hand, Babu Rao, who left BJP recently, resigned from his post, has also joined the Congress, and there he's also hoping a ticket from Gulbarga district. So that's the whole reason you see the Ainur Manjunath is also hoping for a ticket, but unlikely that the Congress party will be giving him a ticket. So that's the reason Manjunath also has made it clear that no matter whichever party in fact invites him, he will be joining that party to contest and give a strong competition to KS Ishwarappa to show his strength.
Also, is this infighting one of the reasons why there's a delay in BJP releasing its list of candidates? Let's listen into what Chief Minister Baswaraj Bommai has to say on this.
ಇಲ್ಲ ನೋಡಿ ನಾನು ಹೇಳ್ತೀನಿ ಕೇಳಿ, ಇದೇನಾಗಿದೆ ಅಂತಂದರೆ ಈಗ ನಮ್ಮ BJP ಈಗಾಗಲೇ 125 ಶಾಸಕರು ಇದ್ದಾರೆ. ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಕೆಲವರು ಆಕಾಂಕ್ಷಿಗಳಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಅವಕಾಶಗಳಿಲ್ಲ ಅಂತ ಮನಗೊಂಡು 2-3 ಜನ ಬಿಟ್ಟೋಗಿದ್ದಾರೆ ಹೊರತಾಗಿ ಇದರಿಂದ BJPಯ ಚುನಾವಣೆಯ ಮೇಲೆ ಯಾವುದೇ ರೀತಿಯ ಅದರ ಎಫೆಕ್ಟ್ ಆಗೋದಿಲ್ಲ.
ಸರ್, DK ಶಿವಕುಮಾರ್ ಹೋಗಿ ಬಂದ ಕಡೆ ಎಲ್ಲ 45 ದಿನ ಅಷ್ಟೇ ಈ ಸರ್ಕಾರ ಹೋದ್ಮೇಲೆ ನಮ್ಮ ಸರ್ಕಾರ ಎಲ್ಲ ಕ್ಲೀನ್ ಮಾಡ್ತೀವಿ ಅಂತ ಕೂತಿದ್ದಾರೆ ಸರ್. ಈಗ ನೋಡಿದ್ರೆ ಆಮೇಲೆ CM ಫೈಟ್ ಬೇರೆ ಸ್ಟಾರ್ಟ್ ಆಗಿದೆ.
ಏನಲ್ಲ, DK ಶಿವಕುಮಾರ್ಗೆಲ್ಲ ಗೊತ್ತಿದೆ, ಅವ್ರದ್ದು ಅಧಿಕಾರಕ್ಕೆ ಬರಲ್ಲ ಅಂತಲೂ ಗೊತ್ತಿದೆ. ಜನರನ್ನ ಈ ಥರ ಮಾತಿನಿಂದ ಮರಳು ಮಾಡುವಂಥ ಒಂದು ಪ್ರಯತ್ನ ಅದರಿಂದ ಭಾಳ ಜನ ನಾಯಕರನ್ನ ಕರ್ನಾಟಕ ಜನತೆ ನೋಡಿದೆ.
ಸರ್, ಸಿದ್ದರಾಮಯ್ಯವ್ರಿಗೆ ಏನಾದರೂ ಆತಂಕ?
Ritu, coming back to you. So, is infighting one of the reasons why there's a delay in BJP releasing the list of candidates?
Well, this can't be the reason for the delay in the list of the BJP. In fact, you see, because the kind of the procedure that the BJP has in fact adapted right now is one, of course, that they have went ahead and have adapted that an internal poll, opinion poll meeting that had taken place couple of days back across the Karnataka and in all the constituencies where the district level officers were given a preference, where all their opinions were being considered, where there were senior leaders who were also being deployed in all the constituencies during this poll meeting. And right after that poll opinion meeting, all that data was in fact been forwarded for the core committee meeting, which in fact took place just last Saturday and Sunday. And now that the other meetings are also ongoing, in that meeting you see all the senior leaders in the Bengaluru constantly are working on that whole list to see to it that what kind of stiff competition that they can give to the opposition in all the constituencies, because moreover the BJP has the plan to release in one set that all the candidates' names. So that's the plan that they are having, and because of the technical process that they are undergoing, so that's the reason there is a bit delay in their list to come out. But yes, very soon, that on 8th of April is that the whole the information that whatever they have assimilated in during these meeting will actually be forwarded to the Delhi office, to the BJP higher command there, and therefore that list will again go through. The senior leaders will again in the Delhi go through that whole list and will be releasing the BJP's candidates list by let's say April 10th, was that we are expecting the BJP's list to be out.
Karnataka BJP is struggling with infighting in BS Yedurappa's home district of Shivamoga. BJP MLC Ayanur Manjunath has threatened the party to fight as a rebel candidate if the BJP feels former Minister KS Ishwarappa or his son from the Shivamoga constituency. The leader plans to resign as an MLC and contest against KS Ishwarappa from the seat. Now, sources have also told CNN News 18 that the party is struggling to manage both leaders. Meanwhile, BJP Parliamentary Board is likely to meet on April 8 to finalize the list of BJP candidates for the upcoming polls.
ಟಿಕೆಟ್ ಸಿಗಬಹುದು ಬಿಜೆಪಿಗೆ ಅಂತಕ್ಕಂಥ ಯಾವುದೇ ಲಕ್ಷಣಗಳು ನನಗೆ ಕಂಡು ಬಂದಿದೆ. ಕೆಲವರು ಅವರವರ ಮಕ್ಕಳುಗಳ ಹೊಸ ಪಟ್ಟಿಯ ಮಕ್ಕಳುಗಳ ಹೆಸರು ಓಡಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದೆ. ಈ ಹಿನ್ನೆಲೆಯಲ್ಲಿ ಮೊನ್ನೆ ಈಶ್ವರಪ್ಪನವರು ಪತ್ರಿಕಾಗೋಷ್ಠಿ ಹೇಳಿದಂತ ಮಾತನ್ನು ಬಹಳ ಗಂಭೀರವಾಗಿ ಯೋಚಿಸಿ ನಮ್ಮ ಸ್ನೇಹಿತರು ವಿಶ್ವಾಸಿಗಳೊಟ್ಟಿಗೆ ಸಮಾಲೋಚನೆಯನ್ನು ಮಾಡಿ
Welcome back. It's D-Day for Donald Trump. Not only is he the first US president in history to be impeached twice while in office, he also is the first former US president to be criminally charged. Days after a New York grand jury indicted him, Trump is now going to be surrendering in the Manhattan court in just a short while from now. Donald Trump faces more than 30 counts related to business fraud in that indictment. The investigation by the Manhattan District Attorney's Office began when Trump was still in the White House and in office. It relates to a $130,000 payment that was made by Trump's then personal attorney Michael Cohen to porn star Stormy Daniels in late October 2016. This happened days before the presidential election, allegedly to silence her from going public about an alleged affair with Donald Trump a decade earlier. Now, Donald Trump has denied that affair. Hush money payments aren't illegal. at least in the United States, in some parts of it, there have been other historical events where hush money payments have been made, and those have become public as well. But ahead of the indictment, prosecutors were weighing whether to charge Trump with falsifying business records of the Trump Organization for how it reflected the reimbursement of payment to Cohen, who said he advanced the money to Daniels. To prove the case, prosecutors would need to show Donald Trump intended to commit a crime. Meanwhile, Trump himself has blasted the indictment, vowing to defeat the left and crooked Democrats, as he called them. He said in a statement, and I quote, "I believe this witch hunt will backfire massively on Joe Biden. The American people realize exactly what the radical left Democrats are doing here. So our movement and our party, united and strong, will first defeat Alvin Bragg and then defeat Joe Biden. We are going to throw every last one of these crooked Democrats out of office so we can make America great again." That's the statement that came to the fore from Donald Trump. Listen in to what his attorney had to say just minutes before we see Trump enter the Manhattan courthouse.
There's no indication that there will be a gag order. It can't happen in this case. Look, when you have a gag order, you have to balance a couple things. The First Amendment, right, which is important to all of Americans, and the right to a fair trial for both sides. So that's a balancing act. Here you have something uniquely different. The defendant is the leading Republican candidate for the office of the President of the United States and will be campaigning. Hard to put a gag order when he's going to be fielding questions about his current legal situation. So, but there's been no indication that there'll be a gag order imposed or even attempted to be.
I'll travel around anywhere on the East Coast to see him. He does his all for us. I'm going to give my all for him. You know, I'm not giving up. We need him back. This economy's a joke. I went shopping last night and I broke my bank account, so it feels like the right thing to do. You know, he's got enough supporters, but he could always use more, and it just means the world to me. It makes me feel like I'm a part of something too.
Donald Trump's arraignment is going to happen shortly, and joining me on this broadcast is a very special guest who is the Nixon-era White House counsel, also a Watergate whistleblower, John Dean. Thank you so much for speaking with us here on CNN News 18. And we do know that New York grand jury broke historical precedent when it indicted the former US president. Now, the formal indictment is still under seal, so we don't really know what the specific charges are that he faces yet. But to put this in context for our Indian viewers here, could you elaborate on how big a deal this really is?
Is that question to me?
Yes, Mr. Dean, go ahead.
Okay, fine. We do not know the details yet. We have some indication of the parameters that will be 30 counts, criminal counts, felony counts in the indictment, and we'll all learn about the same time in a very short while. So it's an unprecedented step. We've never had a president or former president who's been indicted. We have been close before, but never has any prosecutor ever brought this action. When I say close, Richard Nixon, my president, they were drafting, the Watergate Special Prosecution Force was drafting an indictment, but when his predecessor, his successor, Gerald Ford, pardoned him, they stopped drafting because they could bring no action at that point. There'd be no basis for a criminal charge. It also happened during the presidency of Bill Clinton, where they thought he had lied in front of a grand jury that was investigating his relationship with a young lady named Monica Lewinsky. He later would confess that he did lie, but they worked out a deal to not prosecute him and merely have him admit his wrongdoing, and that would be sufficient. But we've never been to an indictment before.
Yes, and that's really why it's such a big deal. We're also learning that we could be seeing Donald Trump actually give a soundbite perhaps while he walks the corridors of the lower Manhattan court. Do you think he's going to, make a big spectacle out of this, try and mobilize his core voters by playing the victim card?
He has a long practice of trying to use his worst moments for political advantage. Why people would be attracted to the fact that he's gotten himself in trouble, why they're sending money to him, it's not everybody, including me, understand. The Republican Party used to be the party of law and order. Here they're openly embracing a type of corruption that many Americans are finding surprising. in the long pull, in the long run, when it gets back to the November elections, if Mr. Trump is the nominee, no one really believes this is going to be to his advantage. It's a short-term gain he's getting, if any.
Sure. So many believe that he's not going to actually win even if he is nominated. But do you think that kind of sympathy card that he's trying to play or making that entire spectacle is actually going to get him that nomination from the Republican Party? Because hush money paid to a porn star is something that's difficult to get consensus on. So I want to ask you what you think the 2024 presidential race really will look like.
Well, Donald Trump's base is very supportive of him. He's a clear authoritarian personality. He's attracted authoritarian followers, people who want to be told how to think and what to do. And so he has a lot of appeal to these people. Now, while he can get the nomination, that isn't enough to get him elected. So there's a big difference. And while these people might support him for the nomination, to get through the general election, it's doubtful this behavior is going to be advantageous at that point.
Sure. Advantageous or not, all eyes are, of course, on this particular case when it does go to trial, not just in the United States of America, but in the rest of the world as well. How difficult is it going to be to actually prove these charges against him, do you think?
You know, we don't know, but we do know that the prosecutor who's bringing these first set of charges, and there are other investigations ongoing as well, but this first prosecutor is a very careful man. He's new in the job, he's elected to that post, and it's very unlikely, given the history of this office, that he wouldn't bring a very strong case. We don't know the case at this point. There's been a lot of speculation that's going to relate to the former president paying hush money to quiet a woman with whom he had an affair, a porn star no less. But we don't have all those details or how he has formed the case, built the case. But we do know he's not likely to have just thrown something out there that he doesn't think he can win. And indeed, the grand jury that actually did the indictment, they too were convinced this was a very winnable case.
Sure, winnable or not, we'll find out soon enough. That arraignment is going to happen in just a few minutes from now. But it was a pleasure speaking to you, John Dean. Thank you so much for speaking with us here and putting that in perspective for our Indian viewers as well.
Pleasure.
Now, let's take you step by step, viewers, of what exactly is expected tonight. We do know, and in about 5 minutes from now, in fact, is when Donald Trump will be leaving Trump Tower and making that 6-mile journey to the Lower Manhattan court. He will turn himself in that courthouse where he will be taken into custody. But it's not like what we see in the movies. He will not be put into handcuffs. We're learning that the former president will, however, be fingerprinted. His mugshot will also be taken. That mugshot is something that I'm sure the paparazzi waiting there is eagerly waiting for it to be out. He then will be read his Miranda rights, which is basically informing him that he has the right to get a lawyer or refuse to talk to the cops. All throughout the process, he will be accompanied by Secret Service agents since he is the former president of the country. He then will be made to wait in a holding area or a cell until he is due to appear before the judge. What happens then? Trump will then appear before a judge for an arraignment. Let me tell you what that is. It's generally the first time a defendant appears in court after being charged. The judge will then brief Donald Trump on the charges that he faces and advise him about his right to go to trial. Trump will enter a plea of not guilty as confirmed by his legal team. That's pretty standard for defendants to do during an arraignment. He then has repeatedly denied any wrongdoing. So that's perhaps what he is going to do inside the courtroom, outside perhaps as well. The judge will then determine the condition of Trump's release. Since he doesn't have any prior offenses, he is most likely to be released today itself, just in a few minutes after that arraignment happens. Reporting live from New York outside that court is my colleague and associate with CNN News 18, Erica Tulfo. Thank you so much for joining us here and giving us a sense of what's happening there. In just a few minutes from now is when we're going to be seeing Donald Trump leave the Trump Tower and make that 6-mile journey to the lower court. Are we expecting him to perhaps brief the media there before he actually enters the courtroom?
Well, it seems like whether that's going to be possible or not really depends. As you can see, there are a lot of security personnel here, as you can see. And of course, he is going to be surrounded by federal agents. I know that I can speak to the amount of protesters in the park across from the Manhattan Criminal Court. So I'm sure that they're all eagerly awaiting. Other than Trump, there have been other high-profile appearances. Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene and George Santos have both made appearances. But as for Trump himself, all we can do right now is sit and wait.
Right, it is a wait and watch game as of now. We do know that as Jonathan was also pointing out, Donald Trump is someone who's known to make a spectacle out of the worst circumstances that he is in. So we perhaps could be expecting him to make that statement. But so far, Erica, have you been able to spot any of the prosecution lawyers or any of Donald Trump's legal team that has already reached the courthouse?
No sign yet of any of Trump's legal teams. Right now, the only people gathered here, other than the two individuals I talked about earlier, and the protesters, are the media and the police. So far, nothing else, but I'm sure activity is sure to amp up once those members make their way into the courthouse. We do know that live broadcast inside the courthouse has not been allowed by the judge, but 5 photographers will be able to take still photos before the actual arraignment.
Right, so there is scope of some of those photographs to come out while that arraignment happens, or perhaps in just a few minutes after that. Now, Erica, you did speak to some of the protesters or the supporters of Trump who have already gathered there. We saw the kind of sentiment when he was leaving his home in Florida. Now we see that similar scene in New York as well.
Yes, definitely a very similar scene. I was actually here earlier this morning and there was a very small crowd gathered. But of course, as we are nearing the time of his actual arraignment, set for 2:15 this afternoon, that number has just swelled. So there are a lot of people in the park across from the court wearing hats and wearing flags that are in support of the former president. Right now, they have music playing. Right now, they're all being sequestered in that park. The NYPD is sure to be keeping an eye on them, but as of the moment, there has not been any reports of any particularly raucous or alarming bits of violence.
Sure. So for now, scenes are quiet there. We'll wait and watch as to what happens. It's just a matter of time. Erica, thank you so much for getting us the latest from on ground there. We'll keep coming back to you, of course, to get us the latest. But here's what is going to happen. After the hearing, Trump is expected to fly straight back to Mar-a-Lago, from where he is going to be delivering a speech. So whether he speaks or not to the media from the courthouse today, he definitely is going to go back to Florida and do so. He's likely to talk about how the indictment and the arraignment are a bit to trip up his chances of running for office again. But can that really happen? Can this actually spoil his chances? Technically, no, since there is nothing in the American laws that stops a convicted or even a jail candidate from running for office. But it's complicated because it won't be easy for Donald Trump to campaign for votes or take part in debates like any normal candidate. That, of course, if he actually wins the Republican nomination. Trump has given every indication that he will be pushing on with his 2024 bid. But this is expected to only deepen the divide within an already fractured US political system. So this is going to have an effect definitely on the 2024 presidential poll. Whether it's going to have an effect on American politics for the years to come, that is something that we will have to wait and watch out for. Political reactions are also trickling in because many in the United States, as in around the world, are sitting on the edge of their seats, waiting to know what happens in the next few hours. Take a listen at some of these reactions that are now coming in.
Now he turns around purely for political purposes and indicts a former president on misdemeanor offenses that they're straining to try to convert into felonies. That is when you know that the law has been weaponized for political purposes. That is when you know that the left is using that to target their political opponents.
Now that was what's happening as far as Donald Trump and his arraignment is concerned. We are staying with the United States, but this is about NASA that has announced astronauts, 4 of them, that are going to be the first humans to return to the moon in over 50 years since the end of the Apollo missions. The 4 astronauts will go around the moon with Artemis 2 mission set to launch in 2024. The announcement comes months after the successful Artemis 1 mission that came to the fore last year. It showed the agility of the space launch system in launching humans towards the lunar orbit on the Orion capsule in bringing them back safely with a precise splashdown. Now, NASA's Moon to Mars program is going to be headed by an Indian-American software engineer, Amit Kshatriya. He was born in Brookfield, Wisconsin. He considers Texas to be his hometown, though. He is the son of first-generation Indian immigrants to the United States. Amit Kshatriya holds a Bachelor of Science in Mathematics from the California Institute of Technology in Pasadena. He also has a Master of Arts in Mathematics. So who really is he and what is he going to be doing? Kshatriya began his career in the space program in 2003. He was working as a software engineer, a robotics engineer, and also a spacecraft operator. He primarily focused on the robotic assembly of the International Space Station, according to the NASA's website. From 2014 to 2017, for 3 years, he served as a space station flight director, where he led global teams in the operations and execution of the space station during all phases of flight. Then from 2017 to 2021, he became the deputy and then the acting manager of the ISS Vehicle Office, where he was responsible for sustaining engineering, logistics and hardware program management. Then in 2021, 2 years ago, he was assigned to the NASA headquarters in the Exploration Systems Development Mission Directorate. He has now been awarded with the NASA Outstanding Leadership as well. He also holds the Silver Snoopy, which is an award that astronauts bestow for outstanding performance contributing to flight safety for his actions as lead robotics officer for the Commercial Orbital Transportation Services Dragon demonstration mission to the orbiting laboratory. Now, what exactly is going to be his role? A lot of it is extremely technical, but he is going to be the Deputy Associate Administrator for the Moon to Mars program. He's going to be responsible for the planning and implementation of this human mission that we are going to be seeing in 2024. We're leaving you with what exactly that mission is going to look like. Thank you so much for tuning in.
I'm Christina Cook. I'm a mission specialist.
I'm Jeremy Hansen. I'm a mission specialist.
I'm Victor Glover. I'm the pilot.
I'm Reed Wiseman. I'm the commander for the Artemis II mission to the moon.
To the moon.
To the moon.
To the moon.
For the first time in 5 decades, the US space agency NASA has named 4 astronauts who will take the humanity back to the moon.
We're going to hear the words, "Go for launch."
Christina Koch will become the first woman astronaut ever assigned to a lunar mission, while Victor Glover will be the first black astronaut.
It is an honor to be here. I also want to thank our families, the trailblazers, our colleagues, and our leadership.
The duo will join Reed Wiseman and Jeremy Hansen to fly a capsule around the moon late next year or early in 2025. In selecting a woman and a person of color, NASA is keeping its promise to bring greater diversity to its exploration effort. All the previous crewed missions to the moon were made by white men. The 3 US citizens and 1 Canadian were presented to the public in a ceremony in Houston, Texas. They will now begin a period of intense training to get themselves ready.
We are going to launch from Kennedy Space Center through the work of the Exploration Ground Systems team. We're going to hear the words, "Go for launch," on top of the most powerful rocket NASA's ever made, the Space Launch System. And we're going to ride that rocket for 8 minutes into Earth orbit. We're not going to go to the moon right away. We're going to stay in an amazing high orbit, reaching a peak of tens of thousands of miles while we test out all the systems on Orion and even see how it maneuvers in space. And then, if everything looks good, we're heading to the moon.
The astronauts won't land on the moon, but their mission will pave the way for a touchdown by a subsequent crew. The Artemis II flight team will be the first to venture that deep into space since the historic Apollo missions that ended in 1972. The flight to the moon will help humans in moving ahead with their aim for a mission to Mars.
Stage 1 chamber pressure is nominal.
Good evening, this is Brass Tacks. I'm Zaka Jacob. The Ram Navami violence and the aftermath that we saw the day after that is still casting its long shadow in Bengal. Today, the governor, C.V. Anand Bose, was in Rishra in Hooghly, which saw a big flare-up of violence. Over 100 people have been arrested, both in Howrah and subsequently in Hooghly, as there is a tense calm in these two districts. The question boils down to this. Why does violence flare up in exactly these same locations every single year? The police had warned, issued guidelines about these specific locations and the possibility of violence flaring up, and yet they didn't seem to do enough to try and rein it in, to try and keep things under control. All that and more through the course of the next half an hour. We'll be speaking to the governor as well, who was in Rishra today. But first, the